ministros, estimados
Excellencies, distinguished ministers,
de México,
dear participants,
queridos participantes, excellencies, distinguished ministers, distinguished members of the government of Mexico, dear participants, I am pleased to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult 2022.
Buenos dias. Let me begin by expressing our deep gratitude to the government of Mexico for hosting us all here in this beautiful setting of the National Auditorium. We are obviously coming to you and broadcasting in various cities in the city of Mexico as well. So over the next 3 days of the conference, including the cultural complex of Los Pinos, which will be opened to the audience once again on this occasion of this conference. We will begin the ceremony with the artistic presentation, I Have a Dream, Tengo un Sueño. I have the pleasure of welcoming the scenic concert with the participation of the Orquestra Escuela Carlos Chavez and the artistic bands of the Community Cultural Program of the Cultural Ministry of Mexico. Please welcome Tengo un Sueño.
Sí, aquí no. ¿Tengo que calentarlo? Un poquito más. Para acá. Para acá. Sí. Cuidado. Ya quedó el podio.
Un sueño. Thank you so much for this wonderful performance that embodies the full diversity of Mexico's culture and creativity. Let's give them another round of applause.
Without further ado, let me now invite Her Excellency, Ms. Beatriz Gutierrez Müller, on behalf of the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Your Excellency, Ms. Beatriz Gutierrez Müller, you have the floor.
Saludos a la directora general de la UNESCO,
My greetings
Madame
to the Director
Audrey
General of
Azoulay.
UNESCO, Madame Audrey Azoulay. Welcome to all delegations. In representation of Mexico's President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I am very pleased to offer you some remarks. As you know, Mexico is a nation with millenary cultures, at least 5, prior to our era: Teotihuacan, Zapoteca, Mixteca, Maya, and that which is known as the mother culture, the Olmecs. For over 3,000 years in a great area of Mesoamerica, these civilizations had their own languages, writings, means of food production, trade exchanges, artistic expressions, and polytheic cultures. We saw the Toltecs rise, as did the Mexica and Mayan writings. Some, to a greater and lesser extent, reached Costa Rica and Panama. With the domination of Spain in the 16th century, there was a mutual enrichment, and as of the 19th century, via migrations from North America, European, South America, and Caribbean countries. 80 years ago, approximately, when we still spoke of the types of roots in the human species, people, because of their physical appearance, were discriminated. Scientists concluded that there are no races in humankind, but rather we are all part of the same root. And this means that we are all equal. Although our color may vary, we are descendants of Homo sapiens. However, although the point has been explained over and over again, racism is unpunished, and it is still with us today. Today, Men and women are treated unequally, with the stigma of being inferior or superior. Although this is prescribed and condemned, it continues to affect human decency. On behalf of races, racists do not represent the model of human beauty or of intelligence. I say this very directly because recognizing this disgrace speaks badly of us as humankind, and doing something effective to improve it is the starting point for one day reaching a culture of respect amongst all who live in this common home. It's not a parenthesis to begin my remarks with this pandemic. It's irrational that we have not been able to do away with, because it is specifically the oldest and most ancestral cultures that, because they have survived genocides, slavery, and other actions against them, have been those that have had the most proven ability to survive. Mexico is a proof of this. And I'll tell you about the next episode because I am convinced that one must not be afraid of history, but rather history teaches us what we are, what we have been, and it persuaded us for the future. The almost complete extermination of the Yaqui peoples 30 years ago is evidence of that arbitrary public policy of reducing Indians to a lower or inferior human being so that superior human beings can dominate them and, in short, take their will, dignity, families, and lands away from them. Years ago, I saw the result of a necrological exam published in a French magazine at the end of the 19th century with respect to a Yaqui cranium. It concluded that the testis of that young person had an anomaly in its brain, and the Mexican government at that time stated that the Yaqui race was indomitable, and as a result, it was justified in submitting it with greater power. Historians know that from the Yaquis, we saw the first Holocaust of the 20th century, to the great shame of Mexicans. I've given you this abbreviated example. It's clear for me that those who want to annihilate ancestral cultures and those of Latin America, on the contrary, are stopping, canceling, and atrophying the development of any nation, assuming that an Aboriginal culture is unevolved, poor in body, of the soul, judging them. That racist, that bigot, quite to the contrary, is contracting human development. It's not homogeneous, nor is there one single thought. The very biological species that we are is heterogeneous by its very nature, and the support and respect for that variety gives us the value that all good faith human being places us on the top level. But what is cultural, I ask? What is culture at the end of the Western 19th century, for instance? The word was not found in newspapers. We discussed the beautiful arts, and in particular, poetry, theater, and opera. In Mexico, something about the arts and theater. In Europe, wardrobes, the rituals, and the Aboriginal and Indigenous were in the field of anthropology. But today as well, but with another connotation, and it was only referred to as the discovery of the exotic things in Africa, in America. If we understand exotic, and I quote, that it comes from a country or a far-reaching culture, and I close my quote, then it wouldn't be a problem according to the dictionary. But the word exotic continues to reflect the derogatory form of a clothing idiosyncrasy or ceremonial actions of groups that are odd and barbarian. Exotic, shamefully for many, is something that was left outside of civilization or of evolution. A pair of words that are hard to define, because even if we end up on one side and I open my quote, a set of ideas or beliefs of a group, and on the other, once again, I open my quotations, the gradual changes of something into a community, these are small words, I repeat, that leave a great veil of derogatory thought. Culture is something that is born in a community, in nations, derived from knowledge, temperament, traditions, and customs and habits that have, create, or have been inherited. Culture is no longer an exclusive art of playing the violin or of sculpting a marble sculpture. It is the art of creating within a time and space, and as both vary inevitably, thus culture is not in humankind, but rather it is not in men, but rather in women who change it. Cultural racism, I believe, reduces creation and art and all of its manifestations to classist or elitist models that detract from those who believe in others as inferior. And we have to make them understand that by detracting from others, they are detracting from themselves and universal and historical culture. That construct where those in the past and today's people have contributed in part. I must admit that my proposal is utopic, but in the 21st century, if we are to speak of culture, it is imperative that we admit that we will never be identical, because we can never think the same way. There is not one single model to be followed. It is just as exotic for an Aymara. The Eiffel Tower is just as exotic for an Aymara as it is for a Parisian who looks at the statues developed by the women of Morocco. Culture is not appropriated by economic funds. It cannot be auctioned. Plagiarism is illegal and immoral. The goods, the heritage goods of humanity are of us all, and we must protect them. We must wager on doing away with the supremacist cultural ideas and have horizontal thoughts, because there are no superior or inferior cultures. In Mexico, our slogan is, "My heritage is not for sale." Our priority is to defend our ancestral heritage, caring for it, protecting it, and recovering the historical memory of where we come from, what we are, and as a result, where we are going. This World Conference is wonderful. Here we will be discussing and defining guidelines for public policy where culture will be considered a world good. And I am sure that you will be able to renew the meaning of the word culture, and as a result propose that culture is the power of multiplicity. It has, almost exclusively today, the capacity to bring together. Culture can be synonymous with peace if we add in an inclusive culture that's not classist, that is not racist, less even more colonizing or hegemonic, then we will have taken one more step towards a world peace that we all want to carpet what humankind does, what humankind thinks and feels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would
Alejandra Frausto Guerrero, the Secretary of Culture of Mexico, to take the floor. Your Excellency, the stage is yours.
Muchísimas gracias.
thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. This scenario was opened by I Have a Dream. I Have a Dream is part of a cultural movement undertaken by more than 12,000 girls and boys and young people from the areas and the social fissures that most hurt us in this country. They are making culture or turning it into a new future. The background that you saw are 850 fragments painted by 850 girls and boys to produce this wonderful tapestry that opened the set for us today. This backdrop was produced by the artisans of Tlaxcala and Puebla with 35,000 pieces of maize, the roots of our culture. There are no pieces of community without culture. Without culture, there are no communities. We are all joined in that. The wells do not like having stones thrown into it because we injure its tranquility. It does not like this game. If you want to play with a well, throw a stone in and you'll see that it will return it to. These are the words of the indigenous Mayan poet Briseida Cuevas. My friends, welcome to you all to Mexico, the heart of the great Tenochtitlan, to hold the second UNESCO World Conference on Political Policies and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult 2022. Ministers of culture, heads of delegation from all over the world, we are joined here today with the intention of reaching a consensus that through a new sustainable development goal on the 2030 agenda, SDG 18, the world will recognize the enormous power of culture is immense for the development of our peoples and nations. Culture brings us together. It is what we know when we're born. It is what will survive us. It's the only thing that we take with us when we migrate. Human history is sustained and supported by cultural roots that are alive and that are intertwined in the continents. It is with great honor that we open the doors of our country to all of the nations and cultures of the world. In Mexico, all cultures are welcome. We are framed by the historical forest of Chapultepec, one of the urban forests that's the largest on the planet and that today devotes 800 hectares to the inseparable natural and cultural biome. And from today onward, it is the home for harmony and the point of meeting for nations and peoples. This great meeting is possible thanks to the enormous support of the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who sends his most fraternal greetings to you and who is extraordinarily represented this morning by Beatriz Gutiérrez Müller, who you have just heard, his wife. Thank you, President, for your absolute commitment to culture as a human right, for your commitment to liberty and the peoples of Mexico and of the world. Thank you for your permanent, clear, and valid call to peace amongst nations. We applaud the commendable work of UNESCO. Thank you for leading the long path to this meeting, works that began from the unanimous approval of Mexico as the venue for this meeting on November 19, 2019 in Paris, when we had no idea of what was coming in 2020. As of then, an intense process of listening and dialogue was unleashed, thanks to the citizenry of the world that took part in more than 200 fora and conferences, to the heads of the region, which headed up the regional consultations, to the great team of UNESCO, to the great team of Mexico, to the public institutions, the private institutions that joined in this effort. But very especially, I would like to say thank you, dear Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, for this shared dream that we begin to bring to reality today. Thank you, Ernesto Otone, and to your entire UNESCO team. My friends, ministers, I thank you for the long journey undertaken from all of your countries to reach Mexico City. Some of you had to go through a hurricane. Some of you weren't able to arrive because of the hurricane, but we are here virtually and face to face. And how important it is finally to be able to recognize the smile of the other off screen. Undoubtedly, we are powerfully witnessing the force of being together, something that seemed impossible just a few months ago. We are celebrating the largest meeting of culture ministers ever, the greatest multilateral meeting undertaken post-pandemic, where the presence of women is decisive. Thank you for the confidence. 40 years after the first World Conference of this type that was also undertaken here in Mexico, today we have in our hands a new opportunity to lay the foundations of the future of cultural policies and their roles for the central tool of peace and human development, as well as fraternal and harmonic development of our societies, amongst others. We have a historical opportunity to serve our peoples from the power of culture. In the final declaration of Mondiacult 1982, a call was made to establish a long-lasting peace to ensure the very existence of human culture. I dare to ask, have we fulfilled that? At that time, the world was experiencing an economic recession, hunger, and various conflicts. At that time, what we called the Third World was experiencing the worst effects of those processes. Alfonso Garcia Robles, a Mexican diplomat and Nobel Peace Laureate of that year, said, "Humankind is first. We must attempt to open the eyes of the world in view of the threats that were surrounding us at that time." Today, 4 decades later, after dizzying technological and social changes, there are deep wounds that continue to hurt us. Conflicts are still there, stalking. A global food crisis is stalking. Inequality is growing, and we have not eradicated racism, exclusion, or violence. Technological development has not served the people. The world is trying to recover from a terrible pandemic that left very painful losses in every corner of the planet, that has hit the poor countries, most particularly our cultural sphere as well. In this crisis, only one element could maintain people and families united, and that element was culture. During the lockdown, music, literature, cinema, going back to our ancestral knowledge were a salve. Culture helped us. It showed itself to be the path to liberty. 3 centuries ago, Sister Juana Inés de la Cruz said, "For the spirit, there is no lockdown, nor are there prisons that can hamper it, because the spirit, our souls, are only a prison by themselves." And that is true. Culture is able to liberate our minds and our souls. Culture builds, it does not destroy. we can make community with it. And if it's not culture, what else could bring us together and keep us together? Just like the kintsugi, the Japanese art that repairs ceramics, culture is able to restore and provide greater brilliance to the fractures of humanity. And why are we not here if it's not to provide alternatives and repair our deep wounds? Let us have a recognition, a peaceful recognition of others. The call is to become one in diversity, to join our efforts through an embrace of our deep cultural roots and to bring into movement fraternity amongst nations for the enjoyment of cultural rights. I'll retake the most illustrious words of Benito Juarez of the Americas: amongst individuals, just as amongst nations, respect to the right of others is peace. The word culture comes from cultivate. In Mexico, maize is the basis of our food, and it is born of an ancestral system called milpa, just as the Bat Dam is in South Korea, or the Koraput of India, or the Incan terraces of Peru. Milpa is a poly-harvest, a poly-crop, that is undertaken in community. They are sustained and they care for each other, whereas the hands of men and women only collaborate for their growth. I would invite you all to create a milpa so that each word expressed here becomes a seed for the good of all. Thus, just as the Mediterranean cuisine has different ingredients from the East and Mesoamerica, the music of the blues comes from North America, and with rhythm from Africa, cultures speak to each other and they come and go. I have the firm desire that the final declaration of Mondiacult 2022 will become a renewed roadmap that achieves cultural diversity and its recognition as the greatest wealth of humanity, erasing racism, discrimination, and anything that has caused such pain. In culture, there is no small country. I would call upon you to build an agenda where culture as a common global good is placed at the center of policies, where cultural diversity is a vehicle for peace and the leading player of well-being in societies, where, as a human right, it is the firm basis for development of children and youth, where we join efforts so that once and for all, cultural appropriation is stopped, as is the illicit traffic and commercialization of cultural goods, practices that have broken the dignity of peoples because they were accustomed to the removal of their past and their contemporary textile creations becoming merchandise and ornaments and making them from objects that give them identity. Let's not delay it. This fraternal action can achieve a dialogue where all of the voices of all nations are welcome. In the world, 7,000 languages are spoken. As a result, there are 7,000 ways of naming things. Let's agree on them all. Let technology serve to understand each other from diversity and not to homogenize thought. Let us maintain, as of now, this cultural, universal movement to build a world that is fairer on the basis of our differences. Cultural diversity is the point of union. It is the strength and not a difficulty to be overcome. It is the best canvas for creative liberty, for imagination and creation. And as a result, I insist, it is surprising that in 2022 we do not have a sustainable development goal that is specific to culture in the 2030 agenda. Let us decide to make an axis for transformation and development of our nations and not an accessory. The cultural industry, which is measured in the economic indicators, represents 3% of the world GDP, $2.5 billion trillion without counting the enormous dimension of cultural, social contributions not registered, like as traditional fiestas, popular arts, people's arts, collective expressions. Perhaps the institution, it would seem impossible for the institutions to open the 2030 agenda, and I apologize for that. But what is the land of impossible if it is not art that achieves everything? Let us not reduce culture to a percentage of budget. Let us consolidate it as a deep axis for transformation, well-being, peace, and happiness. Let us achieve SDG 18, SDG of culture. We are honored to receive here the guardians of culture of our world in our country. We are proud to be able to share with you a part of Mexico over these 3 days in this wonderful and great city of Mexico. Thank you to the head of government of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum, for being with us today. I invite you to listen, to hear, so that Mondiacult 2022 can be the scenario where we assert that culture brings us together. Let our words be the seeds. Welcome to Mexico. From today, this is your home. Long live the cultural greatnesses of the world. Thank you.
Representing the host nation, the government of Mexico, that is Her Excellency, Ms. Alejandra Frausto Guerrero.
I would now like to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, to take the floor. Madam Azoulay, the floor is yours.
Doctora Beatriz Gutiérrez Müller, en representación del presidente de
Dr. Beatriz Gutierrez Müller, representing the Mexican President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
Secretaria de Cultura de México, Alejandra
Ms. Secretary of Culture, Alejandra Frausto Guerrero.
del Gobierno de la Ciudad de México,
Head of Government of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum.
señor presidente de la Conferencia General
President of the World Conference UNESCO, and
UNESCO,
Madam President of the Executive Council of UNESCO, Your Excellencies, dearest friends.
primero quiero decir que placer, que honor
First of all, let me say what a pleasure and an honor it is
en México
to be here in Mexico to celebrate this historical occasion.
40 años después, me enorgullece encontrarnos nuevamente reunidos
I am very pleased to meet once again 4 decades later in the frame of the World Conference on Cultural Policies,
Quiero
Mondiacult.
agradecer calurosamente a las autoridades
I would
de
like
México,
to thank Mexico's authorities, especially Madam Secretary of Culture, who has worked a lot to make this event
Quiero
possible.
agradecer también la
I would also
presencia
like
y
to
el
thank
mensaje
the presence and the message conveyed by Ms. Beatriz Gutierrez Müller, who we know is also very committed to culture, memory, and history. I would also like to thank our hostess of Mexico City, head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum. As you know, Mexico City is part of UNESCO's city. Mexico City belongs to all of our networks, from education to culture, and it is a city where UNESCO's mandate is embodied.
estar aquí hoy en esta capital
I'm very
convertida de
pleased
nuevo
to
en la
be in this capital city, which is once again culture's world capital, as it was in 1982. 4 decades later, after the first edition of Mondiacult, and I can see some of you who were here 40 years ago,
Ha llegado el mensaje especial. Ha llegado el momento
we have heard the special message, and the time has come to mobilize the international community in service of culture.
transmitir juntos este
Together, we can convey this important message. Culture is a global public good. It is a crucial element for all of our dignity. It is through culture that each one of us can discover humankind that we share and become a free and illustrated individual. Moreover, culture is the backbone that is used to build society. On important events, conflicts, and health crises like the one we have lived, culture is a universal language that unites us in all of its diversity and our fundamental humankind. However, in spite of our efforts and real progress, culture and its implications, as well as its potential to face contemporary conflicts, do not have the space it deserves in national and international agendas. This is our common fight here today. Recently, at a global stage, the G20, as well as the UN Security Council, have opened their agendas to culture. However, we still see a lack that Mondiacult has come here to join.
Today, we are, according to the latest numbers, 161 delegations with more than 115 ministers here in Mexico. I would like also to have a special thoughts like the minister for our colleagues from the Caribbean who could not join us and had to cancel at the last minute because of the hurricane. Today, here, we follow the footsteps of those who, back in 1982, began reshaping the very contours of cultural policies. Those who, at the time, began broadening our conception of heritage, and indeed the notion of intangible cultural heritage, which lies today at the heart of UNESCO's activities and conventions, is rooted at the discussions that took place here in 1982. Those at the time who opened discussions on the importance of diversity, of cultural dialogue in the context of growing globalization, even before the legal concepts of cultural exception or cultural diversity emerged. We know that culture is a rapidly growing sector. In economic terms, fostering the employment of youth and women. But we also share the conviction that cultural works and creation cannot and should not be considered as simple economic goods. For culture creates meaning, identity, its rules, its economy, its regulation cannot be left only to the market. On the contrary, culture calls for ambitious public policies to support diversity and to guarantee access for everyone. Here at Mondiacult, 40 years ago, our predecessor grasped how public policies and international cooperation were necessary to shape responses to the challenges faced by the world at the dawn of globalization. And since then, globalization has only accelerated, but new challenges have emerged. Challenges that, because of their very nature and because we live in more and more interconnected societies, require even more international cooperation, more exchanges, more norms, more sharing of experiences, so that we can draft international norms that are both relevant and efficient for the challenges of our times, so also that we can implement international cooperation on the field, and many of you here have experienced it. I would like also to mention the incredible international cooperation that took place under the auspices of UNESCO, be it in Angkor, in Timbuktu, or today in Mosul, where culture is at the heart of our international cooperation to support the rebuilding of peace. It is now up to us here to define and practice this cultural diplomacy of the 21st century. It was at the heart of our discussions during the consultation organized by UNESCO in preparation of this conference, and I would really like to thank all of you for your intense contribution to these discussions, and especially those who coordinate it at regional level. This conversation allowed us to collectively identify priority areas of work, discussions for this conference, and I would like to briefly highlight 4 of these in particular. The first major issue that I wish to mention today is the scourge of the illicit trafficking of cultural goods and the question of restitutions, 2 challenges that demand dialogue and coordinated responses. Today, you can strengthen the courses of action against looting and appropriation that were set out by UNESCO in recent years in the framework of our pioneer Convention of 1970. Whether it means reinforcing national legislations, systematically carrying out provenance research of cultural works, or establishing ethical rules much needed for the art market. Mesdames et messieurs, le deuxième chantier.
Ladies and gentlemen, the second pillar I'd like to mention has a lot to do with what's happening right now, because we all lived it during the pandemic, which is the vulnerability of cultural professionals. This crisis that caused almost 20,000 jobs in the cultural sector, according to our latest data. In order to respond to this crisis, we organized a series of debates, Resiliart, in over 150 countries to listen to the artists, the professionals of the cultural sector, but as well cultural institutions. The needs came up, especially the one for a better social protection for artists and creators. This, of course, is linked to my third topic, which is a just sharing for creators through digital platforms that were imposed at a world scale, and for which we also need global solutions. That way, we cannot only depend to the market law that has unbalanced the protection of cultural diversity that we defend so much. Finally, I would like to highlight a huge challenge that we need to face together. This challenge is not stranger to cultural issues, which is climate change and the loss of diversity. First of all, because they bring up existential issues for our cultural heritage. As you know, it is the World Heritage Sites that are threatened for a quick destruction when we see that they have survived many natural crises. However, it's also the immobile heritage that is linked to nature that is also threatened when nature is threatened. And in order to strengthen our relation with living things, we can support this with cultural expressions and our heritage. For example, by taking the knowledge that we have with the relations of nature that have come from many years from the indigenous peoples. Cultural diplomacy that we look for and that we can build together needs to have the means of our ambition. This will first go through common tools for measuring, because in order to make decisions and to compare, we need indicators, we need common definitions, and this is why we have worked together on the Cultural Indicators 2030 at UNESCO. These indicators want to standardize data and to make more tangible culture's role, its impacts, and its positive impacts, for example, regarding employment and gender equality. It is also through this 21st cultural diplomacy that we have to meet more frequently in order to share more ideas, to share the lessons learned and everything that works for us. It is through a world report that we'll publish every 4 years on culture that we will be able to coordinate, just as UNESCO does for science and education. This will be a very important tool. And finally, we need to have high-level meetings like the one we have today. It is something that we strive to with the first World Conference of UNESCO in 2019, but it's also through these international conferences decided by UNESCO's World Conference that we're gathered here today at Mondiacult 2022, where we can root the tradition of meeting up together more frequently so that we can guide cultural public policies together. I hope that Mondiacult 2022 will be a decisive era so that cultural policies will be recognized as they are, a powerful leverage of public action, international cooperation, and that way, after 2030, culture will find its sustainable space in our common international agenda. We have a new page to write, and if you adopt the final declaration of this conference, we will begin this new era so that culture will find its space at the highest level of the international agenda. And finally, I would like to quote a very famous writer, Carlos Fuentes. As he would say in Spanish, we conclude just to open a new page, this new page that we can write together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Director General, for your inspiring words. We'd also like to acknowledge the presence on the stage of Her Excellency, Ms. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, the Mayor of the City of Mexico. Please, let's give her a round of applause. No, she doesn't have to speak. She doesn't have to speak. She doesn't have to.
Let's give her
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I wasn't prepared, actually, to take the floor and speak to you this morning. But perhaps what I could do is just welcome you to the great Mexico City, this millenary city that has a long history, great cultures. The first culture known here, although there are new discoveries, is the Cuicuilca culture that is over 3,000 years old. You can see this circular pyramid in southern Mexico City that is part of the Cuicuilco culture. You can also recognize here the Mexica culture, these ties to different cultures, not just the original cultures, but this city is actually a mixing pot of different cultures, this very hospitable city that has received over different centuries, and particularly in the 20th and 21st centuries, we received many waves of migration. We received many people here in Mexico City that came from different areas of crises and conflict. There is no better place to undertake this wonderful meeting than in Mexico City, than through the cry for peace, for culture welcome to you all to Mexico City. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Mexico City is indeed a true reflection of the cultural diversity here in Mexico, as well as us who come from the world who get to enjoy this hospitality. Thank you very much. Well, before we close the opening ceremony of the conference and begin with the opening planning session, I wish to invite you all to join me for a round of applause for our distinguished guests for their inspiring words. Please, let's give them a round of applause. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
I invite all heads of delegations to please join our guests for an official photograph outside the National Auditorium. Youth volunteers are on standby to guide you to the venue of the official photograph.
To all the other participants, please stay with us for a few moments longer and enjoy the videos specially prepared for this event. This will take place over a 10-minute period. And to all other participants, please enjoy the coffee break outside, and we will reconvene here for the opening planning session at 12 p.m. Thank you. Muchas gracias.